The first time she mentioned the childhood promise, I thought she was joking. Standing barefoot on her porch in rural Idaho, wind tangling in her honey blonde hair, she said it like it was a fact, like I'd knelt in her yard yesterday, not 2 decades ago, and sworn to marry her with a dandelion in my hand. I came home to escape my collapsing life, not to confront a vow I'd forgotten. But as her gray eyes held mine, steady and soft, I realized some promises don't fade, they just wait for the right moment to bloom. My name is Silas Reed. I'm 25, and until 3 weeks ago, I was drowning in Chicago's noise, a soul-sucking office job that left me empty, an apartment that felt like a hotel room, and a breakup that ended with her saying, "You're just not enough to stay for." I packed a duffel, grabbed my old truck, and drove west to the only place that ever felt like a refuge, my grandma's weathered cottage at the end of Cedar Lane. The paint was peeling, the porch steps creaked, and the silence was so thick it hummed. Exactly what I needed. Or so I thought. By midday, I was sweating through my t-shirt, hacking at the overgrown weeds in the front yard with a rusty hoe. That's when the screen door next door squeaked open. I glanced up, expecting the retired teacher who used to live there. Instead, I saw Lila Mae Carter. She was 35, 10 years older than the girl I remembered, taller, leaner, with laugh lines around her eyes and a calmness that made the world feel slower. She held a chipped ceramic mug with both hands, like it was a lifeline, and didn't rush over. Just stood there, watching me work, her gaze careful, like she was piecing together the boy I was and the man I'd become. "Silas Reed," she said, her voice low and warm. "You're not the scrawny kid who climbed my apple tree anymore." I laughed, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Guess not. You're different too." She smiled, a small, sad thing. "Life does that. Makes you grow up fast." Then she took a step closer, and my breath caught. "Do you remember what you said to me when we were 11? I frowned, sifting through blurry memories, tree forts, summer lemonade, scraped knees. Nothing about a promise. "I don't," I admitted. "You picked a dandelion," she said, her voice softening, got down on one knee, and told me you'd marry me when we were big. Said it'd make all the sad go away. My face burned. "I did that?" "You did," she nodded. "I never forgot." She turned to go inside, pausing at her door. "Welcome home, Silas." The days that followed were slow, tender, and full of small moments that chipped away at my walls. Lila didn't push, she showed up. A plate of warm blueberry muffins on my porch at dawn. A cold bottle of lemonade when I was fixing the cottage's leaky gutter. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did, her words mattered. I noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she'd stare at her phone like she was dreading a call, the way she'd linger by her car after returning from town. One evening, I saw her parked outside the senior center, shoulders shaking as she cried silently. I didn't intrude, just waited until she drove home, then left a note on her door, "I'm here if you need me. No questions." She knocked on my door that night, holding a pan of lasagna. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, her voice still tight from crying. We ate at my kitchen table by lamplight, no music, no small talk, just the clink of forks and the distant hoot of an owl. That's when she told me, her mom had Alzheimer's, and she'd quit her job as a librarian to care for her full time. Her boyfriend of 3 years had left when the caregiving got hard, saying he couldn't handle the sadness. "I'm used to carrying it alone," she said, staring at her plate. "But some days, I forget what it's like to have someone notice I'm breaking." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. It was calloused, warm, and she didn't pull away. "I notice," I said. The storm hit 3 nights later, rain lashing the windows, thunder shaking the walls. I was jolted awake by a knock at my door. Lila stood there, soaked to the bone, her hair sticking to her face, holding a blanket around her shoulders. "I'm scared of storms," she admitted, her voice trembling. I pulled her inside, wrapped her in a thick wool throw, and built a fire in the hearth. We sat on the couch, inches apart, watching the flames dance. Then she turned to me, her eyes glistening. "That promise you made? I don't need you to marry me. But I need to know, when things get heavy, when my mom forgets my name, when the sadness feels too big, will you leave? Like everyone else?" I didn't hesitate. "No. I'm done running. Especially from you." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time since I came home, the cottage felt full. But fear is a stubborn thing. The next morning, I woke up alone. Lila was gone, her lasagna dish washed and stacked by the sink, no note. For the next week, she kept her distance, leaving early, coming home late, smiling politely when we passed but never stopping to talk. I didn't push. I'd spent years running from hard things. I wasn't going to force her to face them before she was ready. Instead, I worked, fixed the cottage's rotting porch rail, patched the roof, helped the local farmer haul hay. Hard work that kept my hands busy and my mind from wandering to the woman next door who'd burrowed into my heart. A week later, I was hammering a loose board on the fence between our yards when I heard her voice behind me. "You don't have to fix my fence, Silas." I turned. She stood there in an old flannel shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, looking tired, bone-tired, the kind sleep doesn't fix. "I know," I said. "Mine's just on the other side." She almost smiled. "I'm sorry I left," she said quietly. "I got scared. Letting people in, it's easier to just push them away before they leave." I set down the hammer, stepping closer. "You don't have to be brave with me. I'm not going anywhere." Her shoulders sagged, like a weight had lifted. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I know," I replied. "But I'm still here." That was all it took. The walls between us crumbled, slow and steady, like the rain melting winter snow. She started joining me on the porch at dusk, bringing mugs of hot cocoa. I started going with her to the senior center, sitting with her mom while Lila read aloud. We talked about small things, her love for old books, my hatred of Chicago's traffic, how her mom used to bake the best peach pie. But we also talked about the hard stuff, my fear of not being enough, her grief over the life she'd lost, the way we both felt broken in our own ways. One evening, she brought over a tattered shoebox and set it on my kitchen table. Inside was a stack of old photos, and on top was a Polaroid of me at 11, kneeling in her yard, holding a dandelion out to her. On the back, in my messy handwriting, "I'll marry you when I'm big. No sad ever again." I kept it, she said, her voice shaking. Not because of the promise, but because that was the first time someone chose me, really chose me, when I was sad. I reached for her hand, lacing our fingers together. "I'm not keeping a kid's vow," I said. "I'm making a new one. I can't promise forever, life's too messy for that. But I can promise today, and tomorrow, and every day after that, I'll show up. For the sad days, the hard days, the quiet days. I'll stay." She didn't say anything. Just crossed the room, sat in my lap, and wrapped her arms around me like she was afraid I'd disappear. That night, we kissed for the first time, slow, gentle, certain, like we'd been waiting our whole lives to find each other again. Winter came early, blanketing the world in white. Life settled into a rhythm. I woke before dawn to work with the local construction crew, and Lila left a mug of black coffee on my porch, no note needed. In the evenings, we'd sit by the fire, her head on my shoulder, listening to the wind howl. She still had bad days, days when her mom didn't recognize her, days when she came home quiet and hollow. On those days, I didn't try to fix anything. I just cooked dinner, handed her a blanket, and held her until the sadness eased. One night, after a particularly hard visit to the senior center, she broke down in my arms. "I'm so tired, Silas," she whispered. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." I kissed her forehead, holding her tight. "You don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." A month before Christmas, my ex from Chicago called. She talked about a promotion, a new apartment, how she regretted letting me go. I listened, polite but distant, and when I hung up, Lila was watching me from the couch, her eyes worried. "You okay?" she asked. "I am," I said, sitting next to her. "I just realized I don't miss any of it. Not the job, not the city, not her. All I want is this, you, this cottage, the quiet." She smiled, but there was fear in her eyes. "What if you wake up one day and decide this is too small? That I'm too small?" I took her face in my hands, my thumbs brushing her cheeks. "You're not small, Lila. You're the bravest person I know. You're my home." That night, she told me about the letter. She'd found it tucked in her mom's old recipe book, written years ago, when her mom's mind was still sharp. It said she'd always worried Lila would carry the world alone, that love wasn't about being strong, but about letting someone else carry the weight with you. She knew, Lila said, handing me the folded paper. She knew someone would choose me. I pulled her close, and that night, we made love, slow, tender, full of quiet "I'm here's" and soft touches, like we were both afraid to break something fragile. Spring came slow, melting the snow into mud and bringing buds to the apple tree between our yards. Lila's mom's health declined, and we leaned on each other harder. When her mom passed away peacefully in her sleep, Lila didn't cry at first. She just sat on the porch steps, staring at the apple tree, until I sat next to her and pulled her into my arms. Then she broke, sobbing, clinging to me like I was her anchor. "I don't know who I am without her," she whispered. "You're Lila," I said. "The woman who reads to strangers, who bakes muffins for her neighbor, who stays when things get hard. That's more than enough." Weeks later, we sat on those same porch steps, watching the sun set over the fields. Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a faded yellow dandelion, pressed flat and tucked into a plastic sleeve. "I've carried this since we were kids," she said. "But I don't need it anymore." She set it on the step between us, then turned to me, her eyes shining. "You once promised to marry me to make the sad go away. Does that promise still count?" My heart raced. I took her hands, grounding myself in their warmth. "I'm not that kid anymore," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I can't promise to make the sad go away. But I can promise to hold your hand through it. To stay when it's hard. To build a life worth staying for. So if I ask you now, not as a kid with a dandelion, but as a man who loves you, will you marry me?" She laughed through tears, squeezing my hand so tight it hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Silas Reed, I will." We married the next fall, in Lila's backyard, under the apple tree where we'd played as kids. The town turned out, old friends, neighbors, even the librarian who'd worked with Lila. She wore a simple white dress, I wore my best flannel, and our dog stole a slice of wedding cake off the table. When she walked toward me, smiling through tears, I thought about that 11-year-old boy who'd made a vow he didn't understand. Turns out, he knew exactly what he was doing. Some promises aren't just words, they're destiny, waiting for the right moment to find its way back. If this story touched your heart, if you believe love is about staying when it's hard, honoring forgotten promises, and finding home in the quiet moments, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We share emotional romances about healing, courage, and the magic of second chances. Comment below, stay, if you've ever found love in the place you least expected. We want to hear your story.